Good morning, Bardstown and Nelson County, and welcome to Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks and Margie Bradford with you this beautiful sunny morning down in downtown Bardstown during the week of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. So be on the lookout for out-of-towners trying to navigate our new roundabout downtown. Plus the traffic coming on West Stephen Foster and Cathedral Manor at our soon-to-be roundabout.
Right.
And that affects you, Margie.
It certainly does.
Anyway, just a quick news update. Mayor Dick Heaton told the Bardstown City Council last night that the new roundabout there by St. Joe Cathedral will become functional in a few weeks.
Oh.
It's now, the construction of the actual roundabout isn't complete, but they have the roadway paved, and they need to stripe it and do some signage, but it will become functional in 2 to 3 weeks. And so then there'll be no more of this T intersection, et cetera. But while they're doing the striping and the signage, they will prohibit left turns from Cathedral Manor onto West Stephen Foster.
Mm-hmm.
So you won't be able to come down Cathedral and turn left.
Right.
You'll have to go to the right, go to the courthouse, make the loop, and come back.
Come back.
But
well,
anyway.
it hasn't improved traffic in front of my house. And in fact, when they get it finished, it'll be worse because there'll be no interruption in the flow of traffic.
Well,
living on Cathedral Manor, I have the worst of all worlds as far as that traffic goes.
Well, you know, you're that's kind of a drag strip almost. It's a nice straight shot for it seems like what 3/4 of a mile or a mile.
Said by someone who doesn't live there.
Well, I've always of course it's just 2-lane, but I think the roundabout should help traffic, or at least it's supposed to slow it down.
Well, it'll help traffic in front of the cathedral.
Right.
It's not going to help cat traffic on Cathedral Manor.
Well, by the time, if you're heading south, by the time you get through the roundabout and you're heading south, you got your foot down on the gas.
Exactly.
And you're trying to back out of your driveway.
Well, not back out. That's a death wish if you back out. No,
I tried that once.
I know. Just went in the snow, I remember.
In the snow, that's right.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I mean, you can grow gray whiskers just sitting in my driveway trying to get out.
I'm a step ahead of you, Margie. I've already got them. All right, well, Margie, we can talk about the weather and everything else all day, but our show isn't about our thoughts about the weather.
No, it is not.
We have a very special studio guest joining us today, and very happy to have her she's a candidate for the. Now, Sierra, you'll have to help me get this correct because I don't want to shorten it improperly. But it's you're a candidate for the Kentucky Commissioner of Agriculture.
Yes, that's correct.
And actually, that job, and we'll get into it, but that job entails a variety of functions that a lot of us probably don't realize, but it all comes with the job. Well, Sierra, tell us a little bit about yourself, and I looked at your website, and I would encourage our listeners to check out your website if you want to find out more about the candidate. And I will tell you, it kind of seeing tobacco growing and seeing people strip tobacco, that really kind of took me back to my youth and actually even adulthood, because I used to ride the back roads during the summer looking to see who's growing tobacco and how much, and because tobacco was a common sight, especially out my way north of town, and it's very seldom seen now.
Kind of a rite of passage for a farm family.
Yeah.
Which I understand yours is.
Yeah. Well, Jim and Margie, thank you so much for having me on the show today. I know that I've talked a little bit with each of you about my background, but I grew up in in New Haven on the LaRue County side of New Haven, so Athertonville, for the people that are familiar with the area. I can, talk about that on this show, but most people across the state don't even know where Athertonville is. And so it's great to be here, and it's great to tell you a little bit about my campaign for Commissioner of Agriculture and the background that I have for this office. And it's great that we're hitting the timing of this so appropriately, because we just got our policy statements up on our website. So if anyone wants to check out my policy statements or know where my background on some of these issues, my campaign website is my name, Sierra Enlow, just .com, followed by .com. So it's easy to find. You can see some photos of our family farm and some of my different experiences in the agriculture industry there too.
Well, and you have other connections to Nelson County. I mean, your mother was a longtime employee here in Nelson County.
I do have to give a shout out to Town and Country Bank, where my mom worked my entire childhood, and then my grandmother lived on St. Thomas Court. So my mom's family's all from Balltown. So I'm basically, I think I should be considered a Nelson Countyan, is what I tell people. I will fight anyone who thinks that Haydorn's donuts are not the best donuts in the state. So I would like to consider myself at least an honorary Nelson Countyan, if not a Nelson Countyan.
Well, when I heard the Enlow name, I was trying to place that. It sounded like a name I'd heard. I heard before, a local name, and I'm like, we don't have a commissioner, an ag commissioner candidate from Nelson County, but we actually do. With very strong Nelson County ties.
So I spent a lot of my childhood growing up here, and I've done a lot of work in this area in my current job as an economic development consultant, and some of the work that I've done across the state. Kim Houston has been a great mentor of mine, so I've learned a lot from her experience, and I've worked with a lot of your local elected officials in Nelson County as well over different phases of my life. So I'm certainly excited to be here this morning and see the town prepping for the Bourbon Festival. That was great to come in to see that the traffic just coming in and seeing the trucks that are setting up for the Bourbon Festival. That's obviously the type of thing that we want to keep promoting in Kentucky, is those type of festivals, and particularly from the Ag Commissioner's office. This is something that I'm particularly looking forward to potentially collaborating with the tourism cabinet on to promote more of the agritourism and rural tourism across Kentucky as well.
Well, tell us what the office of Agricultural Commissioner entails. I mean, I know it's not just on farms. It has a lot to do with the other things. Yeah,
and that's really one of the things that we've worked really hard in this campaign. My campaign team and my supporters have worked to get out about the race, is that it's not just about production agriculture. The Commissioner of Agriculture is the second largest office outside the governor's office in Kentucky, so it has over 200 employees, and they're taking care of everything for Kentuckians, from promotion of Kentucky agriculture products to monitoring weights and measures, which is where you see the sticker on the gas pumps, because the Ag Commissioner actually controls the official set of state weights, which is something that I think people think is pretty interesting. And then the Ag Commissioner does things too, like regulate amusement park rides, provide regulatory services. Something I just recently learned that the Ag Commissioner does, that even as someone growing up in the agriculture industry I didn't know, is that they do regulate the play places at your favorite restaurant. So when you go to a Chick-fil-A and you're taking your kids to the ball pit or on the slides at Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, your Ag Commissioner actually makes sure that those are safe for your children. And so that's something that I think is maybe underappreciated about the office, is all of these different jobs that it takes across the state. I tell a lot of people that the Commissioner of Agriculture is in a lot of ways like your mom in Kentucky politics, because it takes care of everything that needs to be done for state government that no one realizes needs to be done to keep the state moving.
Right. Now, you told me that the official title of the office, it isn't just Commissioner of Agriculture, it's
labor and statistics as well.
Labor and statistics.
And that's, and that's what we've forgotten about the office in a lot of ways, is that it does encompass a lot of things that are not strictly production agriculture. While that is the main focus of the office, is to promote Kentucky farms and to make sure that we're building an ecosystem for good markets in Kentucky. Agriculture just isn't what we think about as being rural Kentucky. There are a lot of aspects about the agriculture industry that impact urban residents, impact people in West Louisville, impact people in Northern Kentucky, people in downtown Lexington. So the office really does a lot more work than thinking about how we get more cows on farms in Kentucky.
Right.
And obviously that's important, but we have to think about, how we're really serving every Kentuckian across the state.
Well, talk to us about the importance of agribusiness. I mean, what all that entails.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite topics. I did my thesis when I was at UK's College of Agriculture on agribusiness financial performance, specifically in the food and beverage industry, which includes a lot of distilleries and includes a lot of food manufacturers and whether or not they're performing well. And that's what we typically think about as agribusinesses, is everything from a food processor, a distillery, all the way to something like Pat Clements' business in Springfield, where you're providing feed and seeds and different farm supplies to farmers. So there's a lot of space in that agribusiness industry, but that's honestly where your Commissioner of Agriculture needs to spend a lot of time and work to help Kentucky farms, is thinking about how we get from the farm gate into that corporate supply chain. And that's, something that I think that previous Commissioner of Agricultures haven't spent as much time thinking about. So when we think about a distillery operation, are we looking at how we're getting grain from Kentucky farms directly into distilleries and processed here locally? And this is something that a lot of farmers, and some of the farmers in this area have actually been focused on, because Kentucky's not a rye producing state. Right. So we actually have some farms in this area that are looking at producing rye and whether or not we can raise that for the distillery supply chain here locally.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that at its core, distilleries are an agricultural product, and how important those grains are on their input side to creating the products they create.
Yeah, and this is an ongoing discussion within the distillery industry, and the Kentucky Distillers Association is advocating really hard for bourbon to be considered an agricultural product. Right. And whether or not we get that actual designated classification, it is really important to look at it in the context of the agriculture industry and as a vital component to this industry in Kentucky, because it's not just, again, looking at what we're producing on Kentucky farms and continuing to support that. We have to think about how we're selling Kentucky products. I had a farmer down in Owensboro and Henderson, when I was down there a couple of weeks ago, tell me, he really loved to farm, but he had to, come pretty quickly to the realization that he could only farm things that he could sell, because that's how he kept his farm going.
Right.
And that's the important part of a farming operation, is whether or not you can sell your product that you're raising.
Now, you bring a background that seems to me to be just about ideal to the office with economic development, because everything is economic development. When it comes to business, you want to see business grow and expand, and and I think that's a great fit. I think with that experience. And you mentioned Kim Houston. She's going to be a guest on our show on the 20th, so she'll be coming up in a week or so. But anyway, But anyway, tell us a little bit about economic development. What interested you in getting into economic development as a field?
I'd always been really interested in how we support rural communities. Even as a kid growing up in LaRue County, my dad was on LaRue County's planning and zoning for 20 plus years. So there was always a lot of discussion about how we continue to grow our community in LaRue County and do it in a way that's responsible and pays attention to balancing growth with heritage. And so I'd been fascinated with that from a very early age. I actually did my undergraduate work at UK and really wanted to go to UK's College of Agriculture because they have a program that's focused on community and leadership development and thinking about how we think about growing these communities in a very healthy, strong way. So I'd been very interested in economic development and pursued an agricultural economics degree to match that, because I think it's really important to talk about numbers as we're talking about qualitative factors. So it's great that Bardstown is one of the most beautiful small towns in America, and we certainly want to continue to promote that, but we also have the economic background to back up that statement and to make sure people have real jobs that are paying good wages in the community. And so that's really why I made the decision to look at the career path that way, to make sure I had a qualitative and quantitative background and ability to bring those two things to a conversation.
Right. Well, it's interesting because those conversations about quality of life and balancing economic development versus your heritage, and farm versus that those are conversations that continue in every community, almost daily, because you always you strive to strike that balance, and I know now right now in Nelson County, I know that there's a lot of discussions about finding additional industrial development land, because I think we're getting some interest, I guess, from companies that would like to locate here simply because of the battery plant in Hardin County. So, as my realtor told me 25 years ago, they're not making any more of the land. So if you want to get a piece of land, you get it. And of course prices are up, and so anyway, but those conversations happen all the time and need to, because we want to continue to grow as a community, both economically, but also strive to keep that balance. And I know that our local planning commission works very hard to try to keep those things in balance, and I'm sure your father did in LaRue County, and those can be some really interesting conversations, but difficult, decisions. Everybody's got an opinion, but what's best for and it's hard to look long term. How decisions you make today affect. Now in my lifetime, I can look back and I can see how, for example, longtime Mayor Gus Wilson, when he ran in the early 60s to be mayor, he and a group of councilmen wanted to hurry. We didn't have natural gas service in Nelson County at that time, and he kind of ran on a platform of pushing to get that done. And they did, and not immediately, but soon after we got service here, we had, I think it was Lily Tulip. We had several manufacturers wanted to locate here.
Right.
Yeah.
And which of course paid big dividends, and we're still reaping the benefits of the work those guys did, 60 years ago.
Right. Exactly.
And it was great leadership, and so that. But those are the things that you can't always tell what's going to happen 40 years down the road, but you make the best informed decisions you can.
But it helps to look down the road and try to discern that.
One of the things I always say about elected officials is that people make, and this is true as an economist too, is that you make the most informed decision that you can with the information that you're given at a time. And so that's how you have to make decisions with this much insight into the future. But you bring up a great point, and a lot of people have asked me why I want to run for office, and I do want to talk about that a bit, because this concept of public service and having these discussions and being part of this and actually talking about real issues is really important to me. And that's really why I wanted to run for office, is to make sure that we were having those types of conversations and we could continue to grow the agriculture industry in Kentucky and our rural communities in Kentucky, because unless we have someone at the forefront leading those conversations and leading them with our urban areas, we're not necessarily going to have that strong rural ecosystem that we want to have in Kentucky. And that's a big portion of wanting to run for Commissioner of Agriculture, and it's also a big portion of why I think I would be a successful Commissioner of Agriculture, because you really have a couple of things that you need in a Commissioner of Agriculture candidate. You need to have business experience and production agricultural experience, and I knew that I could bring both of those to the table, particularly at this stage in my life. I was bringing the right amount of expertise with the right amount of need to get feedback from different generations into the conversation and into this role for this office. And so I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to provide that for Kentucky.
Sierra, the farm bill for 2023 is still hasn't been passed in Congress. Talk to us about the importance of that bill for for farm and economic development, agribusiness in Kentucky.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that are important about the Farm Bill, and I do want to talk a bit about the Commissioner of Agriculture's role with the Farm Bill, because the Commissioner of Agriculture Agriculture will be responsible for going to D.C. and advocating for Kentucky farmers as a portion of this need to get a new farm bill and a quality farm bill passed. It's the highest elected official with that responsibility, and that's very important in the conversation. The farm bill is not necessarily composed of programs that are exclusively impacting production agriculture in Kentucky. About 60 to 70% of it's actually focused on food, nutrition, and support programs to support hunger initiatives across the country. And that's important too because it allows for us to get legislators on the East and West Coast on board with passing good farm legislation. So that's important, so it makes it interesting to everyone. And a lot of people ask why that's included in there is because it is important to getting this piece of legislation passed, but then it's also really important to providing support for our Kentucky farmers. Kentucky has some great farm to food bank programming that we've worked with Feeding Kentucky on to create to allow Kentucky farmers to sell what we consider seconds, so things that wouldn't fit with a primary market like Walmart or Kroger. We can now sell to our Food to Farm Banks program, and that provides additional support for Kentucky farmers.
All right.
Well, the SNAP program and the Feeding America program, they are very essential. To connecting the farmers with what's, with that.
Yeah.
Margie, can I break in here? We've got a person on the phone wants to ask a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Let me hit all the right buttons here. And let's see. Hit all the right buttons again. All right. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. All right, caller, you're on the air. Go ahead, caller. I think I've got you on the air now. Go ahead. I'm sorry, we're not getting you through. We'll have to, if you can, I'll put you on hold, and one of my associates will will pick up your question and pass it into the studio. But thanks for calling. All right, sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, we certainly appreciate anyone calling in with questions, and I would encourage everyone to go ahead and put my KET debate on their schedule for October the 9th. There will be opportunities for people to submit questions for that debate, and then there are typically we'll have a few other debates coming up, so we're looking at pushing out those so that individuals can have the opportunity to ask some questions as well.
What would you say are the major differences between your qualifications and the qualifications of your opponent?
Yeah, and I try to stay away from answering this question as much as I can in a negative light, but because I do want this to be a conversation that's focused on issues. And generally what I've seen from my opponent and what my opponent has said is that he's not focusing on issues. He's focusing on running against national politics and not focused on running for what Kentuckians want to discuss and want to be part of. And my opponent has gone as far as to say that he won't show up to debates against me, and he has missed a lot of events. Even in Nelson County, he missed the Nelson County Ag Day because he will not attend an event that I have RSVP'd yes to. So that should tell you how my opponent is viewing the race versus how I'm viewing the race. And I'm viewing this race as really being focused on issues that impact Kentuckians and not on a national political platform.
But there's also a difference in experience, too.
Yeah. I mean, my opponent and I we're the same age. We competed against each other in 4-H and FFA and Young Farmers. So if you saw my Fancy Farm speech, I made a joke about how you should be used to coming in second to me as a result of that. But I certainly have known my opponent for a long time. He has been involved in the agriculture industry, just like I've been involved in the agriculture industry. But the difference is that I'm bringing some things outside of the agriculture industry and a lot of business experience to this conversation to think about how we reshape this and how we move this conversation forward for Kentucky farmers.
All right, we need to stop and take a commercial break.
Okay.
You're listening to Bradford and Brooks and our very special studio guest, Commissioner of Agriculture candidate Sierra Enlow. And we'll be right back in just a moment. Please stay tuned. All right, welcome back to Bradford and Brooks. Jim Brooks and Margie Bradford will be with you till the top of the hour on this very sunny, beautiful Wednesday afternoon here in downtown Bardstown. And in case you'll probably hear more about this, but at last night's city council meeting, the mayor said that the state plans to have our new roundabout down by St. Joe Cathedral functioning. It won't be completed until late this year, early next year, but the actual roundabout function will soon be in place. And rather than the kind of convoluted intersection we have now, they have to stripe and do some other signage before they can do that. It'll take approximately 2 or 3 weeks. But we can look forward to that, and I'm sure that'll improve traffic flow in the area, except for Margie down on Cathedral Manor,
Exactly.
who still takes her life in her own hands if she tries to back out from her driveway into Cathedral Manor. But anyway, there'll be more information. I know the state just issued a press release early this morning, and we'll have that on the Nelson County Gazette and probably on the local news here at noon. All right, our special studio guest this morning is Sierra Enlow. We will adopt her as a Nelson County / LaRue County native. Experience in agriculture and economic development, which is a great combination because she's running for Commissioner of Agriculture in Kentucky as a Democrat, and I won't hold that against her because I think she brings a lot of great experience to the job, and I think I think those who involved in agriculture statewide, which includes not just farmers, but lots of businesses and related industries, would benefit from having her as the voice of Kentucky agriculture. Now, Sierra, I know that you've been going to a lot of events statewide, and I know that agriculture in Kentucky varies by regions, and those concerns also vary.
Sure.
So when you travel around the state, what are you hearing from people in agribusiness, farmers, et cetera? What are their concerns right now?
Yeah, I mean, the office certainly encompasses a lot of different issues and a lot of different concerns that people have. One of the major concerns that we're hearing across the state is the concern about the shortage of veterinarians in the state and what that looks like and how we're able to help facilitate that. For those listeners that may not know and have the background about what the Commissioner of Agriculture's role in this, the Office of the State Veterinarian is actually housed within the Commissioner of Agriculture. And that Office of the State Veterinarian has 3 really main functions. They have some animal health work. They do some regulatory veterinary work, but then they have an Office of Emergency Management and Emergency Management Response. So when we think about a natural disaster taking place in eastern or western Kentucky, the Office of the State Veterinarian deploys veterinarians to those areas to make sure that livestock is safe, that people's pets are taken care of, that we're providing resources to take care of everyone, the animals that are in that area, and to make sure that they're safe and they have appropriate accommodations. We're currently at a state with the Office of the State Veterinarian from an employment standpoint that if a major disaster happened during another agricultural event in Kentucky, we wouldn't necessarily have the capacity to respond in the manner that's necessary. So we have to think about how we fix that as a state Commissioner of Agriculture and really how we're talking about that and getting resources for it. And this is going to be something that the Courier Journal is reporting on later in the month and helping provide additional information on. But that's something that is a major concern for your next Commissioner of Agriculture. And there are a couple things that we want to look at in that space. One of those is leading by example to make sure that we're providing competitive wages because that's a big issue, is that you can make quite a bit more money in the private sector than working for the Department of Agriculture. And so it makes it hard to attract talent, particularly to something that may be in a large animal or emergency response type of situation.
Right.
Some of the other issues that we're hearing, and I hear this a lot from urban voters, but it's actually an issue for rural voters too, is that the issue of food access, particularly in West Louisville and depressed neighborhoods, is something that I hear a lot about. And a lot of people here, and I mean, that's talked about frequently on the Louisville media market, but what is missed in that conversation is there are counties like Trimble County that don't have a single grocery store. They might have $2 Generals, but they don't have an IGA or they don't have a Kroger. And so that's something that your Commissioner of Agriculture will need to spend a lot of work on in this next 4 years, just getting those communities up to those levels of access so that we can help provide our Kentucky ag products to Kentuckians and make sure that that's a big portion of it. The Kentucky Retail Federation is closely tied to the Department of Agriculture and does a lot of work with the Department of Agriculture. So people that are individuals like the IGAs, the smaller groceries, the Boone's Butcher Shop, those are all things that are going to be portion of how we looked at food access in Kentucky and able to support that. And then there are a lot of other issues. Medical marijuana is a big issue, and how we approach the rollout of medical marijuana. And this is honestly where I tell people that you really do need an economic developer in this role. Because what happens with new crops in Kentucky is that we want to tell Kentucky farmers to go ahead and grow this, but we're essentially selling them a fairy tale until we have, a market ready for this crop. And your ag commissioner should be thinking about that, of how to provide processors and get retailers in place before I tell Kentucky farmers to grow our crop.
Well, that's kind of what happened to hemp.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened to hemp. And we told farmers to grow without having regulations on the quantity. And we know as a Kentucky ag industry that the tobacco quotas were really important in the stability of the tobacco industry. So we have a lot of experience making stable industries, and we need an ag commissioner that's going to bring that type of expertise to this office to provide new opportunities for Kentucky farmers as well.
Well, you're as ag commissioner, you would also have to do a lot of petitioning Washington.
Yeah, it's not just petitioning Washington. We've got, the ag commissioner also does a lot with imports and exports for the state. So they're doing trade missions to places like Japan to help find new buyers for Kentucky bourbon. They're doing trade missions to China to make sure we have markets for Kentucky pork, and to, a lot of different international markets to make sure that we have these markets established and that we're getting Kentucky products into those. Your advocacy role and your professionality in a Commissioner of Agriculture is really important, and being able to understand how to best present Kentucky agriculture to non-agriculture audiences. And that's something that I like to talk about a lot, because this is something that is hard in the conversation, right? It's hard to code switch from being a rural Kentuckian to an urban audience. It's hard to, explain that I grew up on a farm in Athertonville to someone who is maybe in the C-suite at Yum Brands, and we've got to figure out how to talk about that agriculture conversation on all those different levels. And I'm pretty fortunate that I'm able to bring some business expertise and that economic development expertise to that conversation, because that's what, honestly, we need in it. And we have to have someone who understands all those different levels to be able to have an effective presence there.
Well, Sarah, now I should know this, but what's Kentucky's biggest cash crop right now? Do you have any idea?
It's poultry.
Poultry?
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
All right.
So, and that's something that, again, is hard to believe and hard to understand, because we don't really see poultry farms in Kentucky east of I-65.
Right.
And it's, very concentrated in Western Kentucky, which is, part of the reason that you had to deploy so many state veterinarians down to Western Kentucky during the natural disasters, is because we had to make sure that those poultry farms were secure and that they were, in a healthy situation.
Right. Well, on those large poultry operations, keeping utilities and running are crucial, to maintaining your birds.
Yeah.
And there's lots of, when you have a large operation, there's so many different pieces that, the average person may not think about how crucial it is, even just to have sufficient backup generation power, and then that power may have to last. for an extended amount of time
Yeah.
while, power is restored. And then, you mentioned natural disasters. Well, in flash flooding situations, it isn't just the people that you have to, you have livestock concerns too,
Yeah.
and and I'm sure that's where the emergency responder veterinarians fall into place.
Yeah, and Jimmy brought up a great point about having large operations, and I do want to touch on how important large operations as well as small operations are for the state of Kentucky. And I talk about this a little bit on the campaign trail, but agriculture is the only industry that if you're employing 30 or 40 or 50 people, now suddenly you're an evil corporation instead of a family farm. But we have so many great family farms that are employing 30 or 40 people in our rural communities, and particularly in Nelson County and LaRue County and some of these counties, that I want to stress the importance of these large operations for providing economic stability for our rural communities, because this is these are great family-owned businesses that are providing health care and stable jobs, and are able to implement more environmentally friendly operations, as well as providing supplies to the distiller, meeting the demand for a distillery operation. And so they are very important to our communities, as well as the small farms, as being a part of the agriculture conversation and the diversity of agriculture, because our small farmers are where we get innovation in the agriculture industry, and we're able to meet the needs and rapidly respond to new crops and to consumer needs that may want a niche product, or even provide a specialty product and test out something like rye, like we were talking about earlier, that a larger operation just wouldn't have the bandwidth to move as nimbly on those new products.
Right.
Well, and farmers are almost forced to go big in order to stay in business, aren't they? I mean, because small farmers almost have to have another business in order to have the small farm.
So I do talk about that a lot, particularly as it relates to economic development in agriculture, because the best way that we can keep small farms in operation is to have good off-the-farm jobs in these rural communities.
Right.
So that's the importance of really attracting rural manufacturing and operations to your community, is that you get to find a good off-the-farm job with health care that has health insurance and benefits, which allows you to keep farming in your rural community. And so that's part of the reason I talk about economic development and agriculture so closely being related. But then also I do want to talk about the importance of what the Commissioner of Agriculture does with the Ag Development Funds and the ability to support beginning farmer and rancher loans and to help encourage people to get involved in the agriculture industry. And if I may not have been a traditional farmer, to come look at this as a profession. And I talk about this particularly as it relates to minority farmers a lot, because I do want to acknowledge that I have a lot of privilege of coming from an agriculture background. So I'm going to know bankers and accountants and attorneys that know how to structure a business around an agricultural production schedule. And I have those connections because I came from that industry. If I'm a new farmer that's looking at moving into the industry, I don't necessarily have that.
Right.
And I think that there's some opportunities for the Department of Agriculture, with our focus on beginning farmers and ranchers, to partner with Kentucky chambers across the state of Kentucky to help find those resources and provide those wraparound resources for new farmers that are going to be looking at maybe taking over this industry.
Well, I know that I'm not sure what the average size of the Kentucky small farm is, but I will tell you though that in my lifetime, my neighbor across the road, of course I live out in rural Nelson County. My neighbor across the road has he moved in he bought his house across from me 65 years ago, and he has raised Angus bulls, bred them and sold them up until the last couple of years. But he also worked at GE.
Yeah.
And so he had a good income and health insurance and benefits, but that allowed him to continue to operate his, his 75-acre farm, raising, hay and a few crops and a big garden, and then raising the bulls and selling calves or whatever. But and then my wife's uncles, every one of them worked at GE, and they all had farms. And they were all sundowners, They'd get home from work and they would do what they were. Now, I don't know how they weren't extensive, but they loved being on the farm and they loved their farm.
Oh, yeah.
But that off the farm job made it possible.
Yeah, and that's truly the story of a lot of Kentucky agriculture, because our average farm size in Kentucky is just under 200 acres. The average farm size that you need to have a farm to be sustainable for a single income is about 1,000 acres. So you have to get fairly large to be able to provide an income for an individual to farm full time, and the scale of it has to be pretty significant.
Right.
So, having these off the farm jobs are very important, and particularly having them in Louisville, which is something that the city of Louisville doesn't always realize, is that their workforce comes from rural Kentucky. And so that's been part of the conversation that in my work, as I've been an economic development consultant, is explaining that a lot of your workforce comes from, farms, and we're able to, and they are good workers because they know how to work, and they know how to, fix anything you need to get fixed. But it is really important in that larger conversation of what Louisville's economy looks like is what does our rural economy look like?
Right. And I know that of course, GE was such a huge employer going back to when these guys first got into the workforce. But if you look at the diversity we have of off the farm jobs in this area now, Nelson County, you don't have to drive to Louisville anymore. For that off the farm job, but it does make operation of a small farm a reality if you want it. And I think that's that it makes it possible. It may not be practical, you may not make a bunch of money, but there's nothing like having your own crops and your own land and your own livestock.
And I mean, that's a story that we need to tell, because that's also going to be important in the advocacy for rural broadband internet access. And whether or not we're able to get broadband to the parts of Kentucky that we need. I have one of my cousin's wives works remotely for Humana, but she lives down just outside of New Haven. And, she has a great job because she's able to get internet. And if we can't get that infrastructure to the rest of rural Kentucky, then we don't have opportunities for people to stay on their farms.
Absolutely. That is so important. Because in this era of working remotely, my daughter worked in D.C. for a number of years for a PR firm, and she just less than a year ago, moved back to Bardstown because she can work remotely, and so she's got a fiber optic line to her house, and that does all the virtual meeting and everything. Of course, a lot of that is in the result of COVID, but she enjoys being, she's got her place in 3 acres and loves being in the country again. I mean, she misses sidewalks, but you can go visit sidewalks, But agriculture touches us all. And and we don't even, and out here I know that we've got our great farmers market and the groceries, but we never think about food deserts. We never think about what it would be like to not have access to produce. Not have a farmer's market to go to, or grocery stores that carry fresh produce. And so those are problems that need to be solved. By various communities.
And the SNAP program is so important. Not only to the food desert, but to the farmers who can supply that food.
Right.
And one of the things I want to mention in closing that I will be supporting is that we have this program called Double Dollars for Kentucky Farmers Markets. So you can double your SNAP benefits if you purchase local foods from local operations. I'm looking forward to support that as the next Commissioner of Agriculture.
That's great.
Yeah, because I think it's really important. It's the difference between buying a pound of bacon at Kroger or buying it from a local farmer here.
Excellent. Well, Sierra, we're just about down to the wire. Any additional comments you want to leave for our listeners before we call it a day?
Yeah, sure. The one comment that I've been really stressing to get across to every audience is that there's a reason that every Kentuckian votes for the Commissioner of Agriculture, and it's truly because this office touches every Kentuckian. And it's typically been an office that we've forgotten about as voters across Kentucky, and so I think it is really important to learn about this office and to think about who we're electing to this office, because it is more important than getting a former UK basketball player elected. There is actually real work this office does that impacts everyday Kentuckians, and so try to make sure that I'm encouraging everyone to take some time to learn about this and to make an educated choice as a voter for this office.
Right. All right. Very good. Well, Margie, you have anything? Let's see. Do you have our calendar for our guest for next week? I think it's
I do.
Should be Kim Houston next week, I believe, the 20th.
It is.
Kim may be sitting in her office thinking, what? Where?
It is Kim Houston.
Yes.
It's going to talk about economic development.
That's right.
Well, that would be a great follow-up from our conversation today. So,
yeah, and because it's on everybody's mind. We keep hearing the news about the Blue Oval plant and the jobs it's bringing and already brought to Hardin County, and the impact that those jobs will have on surrounding counties and the spinoff industries to support that battery plant. I mean, Bardstown benefited greatly years and years ago with the Toyota plant in Georgetown, with suppliers that located here. So
it's still here.
Right, and that's right. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's Bradford and Brooks. Thank you again, Sierra Enlow.
Thank you for having me.
And continued success on the campaign trail.
Well, thank you. Hopefully I'll see everyone out there.
All right, and we will be back. Margie and I will be back next week with another Bradford and Brooks. Until then, have a great week. Get out and enjoy the weather, will you? Take care.